So, dear colleagues, I think that the majority of people who are going to speak today have already jumped in. So I would kindly ask you all to activate your cameras. And so we can start so as not to keep all of our viewers and participants waiting. So let's check the mics. Do you hear me well? Right?
Yes.
Yes, brilliant. So dear colleagues, greetings to all again. I think that we can launch our panel. Today we have quite an interesting discussion about non-Eurocentric world and how it's all going to develop in the years to come. We have a great range of topics about all the aspects of international relations and event management. So we are going to talk through them as well. Before we start our session and open it up to the speakers, I would like to make a very short introduction just to place our discussion into a larger context of ongoing events. So I think that it's not a huge surprise to all of us that the current instabilities which the world is facing are not something new. And we can start the calculations of the recent developments, maybe from the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course significantly disrupted not only supply chains, not only financial markets, but also had a huge impact on ordinary people's lives. And of course, it was felt widely in different parts of the globe when people were placed under quarantine, when huge cities were locked down, and so on and so forth. And of course, it also had a very huge impact on the economic development of the countries and of the whole world as well. And we all noticed the slowdown in the global economy with the world GDP decreasing, and just the last year we had several countries being on the track back to normality, with the economies trying to bounce back in some way and expecting a very, very moderate rise. And after that, of course, some political changes appeared, and all of us knew that it also not started only from Europe and from Ukraine, which we are witnessing currently, but we also can recall the instabilities which started in Central Asia. We remember the political crisis in Kazakhstan. Then we also can recall the Taliban coming back to power in Afghanistan. Then, of course, the crisis in Europe erupted with Russia launching military operation in Ukraine. And now we also can look far to the east, for example, to Pakistan, where we also can see the changes in the political structure with the prime minister being ousted by the vote in the parliament. And so we are going to have a new political representatives being at the top authority in Pakistan. And of course, all of these changes, not surprisingly, happen in Eurasia. And so Eurasia is, of course, a very important geostrategic and geopolitical term in world politics. And I think, judging by our today's topics, a lot of themes are going to be dedicated to Eurasia exactly. And so I also guess that it's not a coincidence, because Eurasia occupies truly a very important place in today's global politics. And just before we open up the session to our speakers, I would like to give a floor to a very distinguished guest whom we are very happy and very privileged to have today. He served as a long-year correspondent for American leading news organizations in different countries all across Eurasia. He talked to a huge number of people, he interviewed them, and of course he knows what's going on the ground in the majority of places all over the continent, and he can share his brilliant ideas and insights with us. And what's most important, I think, for all of you, because many of you are young researchers and are going to continue the education or maybe to go for work to large corporations. So is the instrument how you can get your message across. And our today's expert knows this perfectly, judging by his huge career track record, being employed by the most prestigious American news outlets. So I'm very happy to introduce to you our speaker today, so Jolyon Naegele. And he's going to talk to us about his personal experience and his brilliant ideas on the ongoing events. So, Jolyon, can you take it over?
You all hear me well?
Yeah.
So, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Danil. The words, "What's past is prologue," from Shakespeare's The Tempest, are engraved over the entrance to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. As a graduate student doing research there 45 years ago, they gave me pause for thought, and I haven't forgotten them to this day, because we learn from the past, and if we don't, we are condemned to repeat past mistakes. I was born in New York in 1955, the son of a refugee from Nazi Germany and a migrant from England. I came into this world at the height of the post-war baby boom, at the tail end of McCarthyism in the US and French and British colonialism in Africa, and on the cusp of de-Stalinization in the USSR and its satellite states in Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union militarily assaulted its ally Hungary when I was a toddler, resulting in 200,000 Hungarians fleeing to the West, many of them to New York City. When I was 6, the construction of the Berlin Wall plugged the last hole in the Iron Curtain, thereby dividing Berlin in two, reducing a massive flight of East Germans to the West to a trickle of dangerous escapes. When I was 7, Nikita Khrushchev tried to deploy Soviet missiles in Cuba, and the world came as close as it has ever come to a nuclear conflagration. That was not a mere factual development, but a life-shaping experience, as was 1 year later, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. My world and that of most Americans became separated into everything before and after November 22nd, 1963. As a child, I became increasingly interested in Eastern Europe, especially Czechoslovakia, which between the two world wars had been a multi-ethnic, tolerant, liberal democracy and one of the world's 10 most industrialized countries. I also became increasingly interested in the arch enemy, the Soviet Union, its history, society, political system, and foreign policy, the latter of which was a focus of my graduate studies. But it was Czechoslovakia that captured my curiosity and imagination. After Leonid Brezhnev came to Prague at the end of 1967 and told party leaders at the Vaše dělo, when they were frustrated with criticism from Czechoslovak writers that there was censorship, that books couldn't be published that should be published, a new party leader was elected or appointed in Czechoslovakia, Alexander Dubček, who had close ties to the USSR since childhood. He'd grown up in Kyrgyzstan, where his father had taken the family to help build socialism in the 1920s. The Communist Party in the spring of 1968 took a back seat in the Prague Spring, and it was writers, above all writers, but people in all walks of life who started becoming politically engaged, and the party's leading role in society guaranteed by the Constitution was under threat. Within 2 months of Dubček's appointment, Soviet and East European communist leaders began meetings, bilateral, multilateral. And the biggest critics of what was happening in Czechoslovakia were the head of East Germany, Walter Ulbricht, and Petro Shelest, the head of the Ukrainian Communist Party. Also, Soviet military strategists perceived this situation as potentially dangerous. That Czechoslovakia was already the weakest link in the Iron Curtain on the front lines with NATO, as perceived by Soviet military strategists, because the Red Army had withdrawn, as had the US Army, from Czechoslovakia at the end of 1945. And the Americans were sitting in Bavaria, and it was only the Czechoslovak army on the other side of the border. And so after a series of these meetings and warnings and threats, on the night of August 20th to 21st, 1968, the armies of 5 Warsaw Pact member states, there were 7 states, 2 refused to go in. That shouldn't be forgotten. It's actually rather important. But 5 went in. In the first 24 hours, it was 250,000 soldiers. Within a few days, it was 500,000. 500,000 into a country with a population at the time of 14.5 million. That's less than a third of Ukraine's population. A territory 23% of the size of Petroshelest's Ukraine at the time. And they stayed until 1991, not at such large numbers. The numbers eventually went down. There was no military resistance. There was public resistance. It died down gradually over the next few weeks. A Czech student, Jan Palach, set himself on fire on Prague's Wenceslas Square in January 1969 in protest, not at the Soviet occupation so much as at the growing Czech or Czechoslovak indifference to the occupation and the so-called normalization of life. But it unfortunately changed very little. He became a hero, a folk hero, but as the so-called pravierki started and everyone had to answer for whether they supported the fraternal assistance from August 1968 or not, tens of thousands of people lost their jobs and 300,000 people emigrated to the West because they saw no future. It was the end of creativity. It was not only the end of creativity in Czechoslovakia, it was the end of creativity in the Soviet Union. If you look at the level of Soviet cinematography in the 1960s and compare it to the 1970s, look at Bondarchuk's Vojna i Mír. That couldn't be produced after 1968. That level of creativity was suppressed. It was suppressed for 20 years in Czechoslovakia and in the Soviet Union. You had a growing gerontocracy in control in both states, and it was a period of what you call in Russian время застоя. There was no further development, no genuine development, not technologically, not creatively, not in any way. And it was only as a result of a new generation taking over, the aftermath of Chernobyl in 1986, etc., that things began to change. In end of 88 or beginning of 1989, I met in Prague informally with a group of Soviet journalists who were based in Prague at their request. And they said to me, you know, we waited all our lives to get abroad, to work abroad, to see the world. And now things are boiling in Moscow and we're stuck in Prague where nothing is happening. That opened my eyes to how quickly things were changing. I went to the Soviet Union for the first time in 1978. Shortly after I crossed the border, in the railway station at the border at Chop in Ukraine, I was asked by a representative of Intourist if I thought that the Soviet Union could ever catch up to the United States. And I said, well, you should ask me this question at the end of my visit, not 5 minutes after I've crossed the border. And then I said politely, diplomatically, well, if you really work hard, maybe someday. But the trip by taxi from Chop to Uzhhorod, 20 kilometers, maybe less, in the middle of the night, made me draw the conclusion that no, not in the foreseeable future could the Soviet Union ever catch up. The state of the road, the state of the surroundings was as if the Second World War had ended last month. And this was 1978. In 1988, I traveled around as a Voice of America reporter in the Caucasus and Central Asia to see the effect of the new Gorbachev policies of glasnost and perestroika, to see whether they were actually being implemented outside of Moscow and Leningrad. It was another eye-opener to the extent that the repressive system of state security had barely budged, had barely changed in Tbilisi, in Baku, in Tashkent and Almaty. All of these places, Dushanbe, only in Yerevan did I have a feeling that something was happening, that something was Nagorno-Karabakh, which I'd never heard of until that moment. Only in Yerevan did dissidents seek me out instead of the other way around. Everywhere else, I had the feeling that there was a disconnect between Moscow and the republics. I came back for an extraordinary Communist Party Congress a few months later, back to Moscow. And on that visit, I saw that, yes, because of the war in Afghanistan, there was something happening within Soviet society, within Moscow society. Things were starting to change. There's growing frustration. And then came the revolutions, which I witnessed in Czechoslovakia and in East Germany and Hungary, etc. And I can't say that they were expected. Change was expected, but not with the speed and all-encompassing convulsion that we saw. The problem with all of those revolutions, large and small, in most of the countries in the Soviet bloc, was that there was an inadequate transformation, political transformation. Too much of it was superficial. The economic transformation was disingenuous. Václav Klaus, the finance minister and then prime minister of the Czech Republic, and subsequently president, said that there's no such thing as dirty money, which is the worst message he could have said. There was no de-Bolshevization in many of these countries, and there was certainly no de-KGBization, or however we want to put it. The security structures were inadequately dismantled. When Václav Havel came to the United States in February 1990, he was only the second or third foreign leader ever to speak to the US Congress. Lech Wałęsa had been there a couple of months before. Winston Churchill might have spoken, but so he was the second or third. And the most surprising thing he said in his lengthy speech was, if you ask me how you can help Czechoslovakia, all I can say is help the Soviet Union. He understood, Havel understood, that without genuine transformation, and this is 1990, Gorbachev still very much in power, without transformation of the Soviet Union, helping the Soviet Union to come into the modern era and put the post-World War II era behind it, politically and economically, we would be doomed to further threats. And then, unfortunately, the 90s were very badly handled everywhere, badly handled by the Americans as much as by anyone else. And part of the problem was a belief in the United States. What do we need Kremlinologists for anymore? Who cares? Particularly after the breakup of the Soviet Union, who cares about Moldova? Who cares about any of these other small states? Who cares about Russia? It's not important. We need to focus on Iraq. We need to focus on Iran, etc. And so they lost their focus. The wars in Bosnia, Croatia, and then in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and later in Kosovo, helped to some extent to refocus things. And Russia participated as a peacekeeper in Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. However, my own experience as a witness to this, I had very mixed experiences. When the first Russian contingent arrived by train in eastern Slavonia, Serbian-occupied Croatian territory, in 1991 or two, I think one, definitely one, 1991, I interviewed the commander, the Soviet military commander of the contingent, and he was correct and proper, and we had no communications problems. But while I was waiting for him to come out of the base, I spoke to the regular soldiers on guard. And I said, well, how do you like it here? I said, well, you know, we spent 10 days on the train till we got here. And, you know, we ran out of food. And the first thing we did was to sell our equipment to the locals for food. Well, that told me something. And that tells me something today, that some things don't change, that one doesn't learn from one's mistakes. In 1999, at the end of the NATO bombing of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which at that point consisted only of Serbia and Montenegro, the Russian army contingent in Bosnia made a dash for Pristina airport to get there before the British troops came in from Macedonia. The assumption, right or wrong, on the part of US and British forces was that the Russians wanted to take control of Pristina and that way control what was going to happen in Kosovo. And there were tense negotiations. In fact, the real reason was probably more prosaic, that there were Yugoslav military aircraft, MiGs, Sukhois, in a bunker in the mountain behind the airport that Yugoslavia didn't want to lose to Kosovo or to NATO, and the Russians wanted to get them out, and they did in the end, and it took several months. But that was not known at the time. It wasn't in the media. Anyway, Russia did not get an occupation zone of its own in Kosovo when Kosovo was carved up by the Allies in June 1999. Russia was told, you can be wherever you want, but you will play second fiddle. You will not be in charge of a given zone. The Russians were understandably irritated. They were attacked in some places by stone-throwing kids in the American zone in the southeast. So the Americans said, okay, fine, we'll do joint patrols in the same vehicle, a Russian and an American soldier together. The stone throwing ended. the Russians were satisfied there at that local or regional level. In June 2003, the Russian forces, all Russian forces were withdrawn from Kosovo, from KFOR, which was led by NATO. And an official statement was issued in Moscow that when a reporter asked, well, why are you leaving? The answer was, Kosovo is not in our sphere of interest, not in Russia's sphere of interest. 2.5 years later, Russia decided, Russian Foreign Ministry opened a liaison office in Pristina, subordinate to the embassy in Belgrade. And Vladimir Putin began a series of public statements about Kosovo, that something has to be done. And over the next 16 or 17 months, he came up with various ideas, but the main idea, spelled out sometime in the middle of 2006, was careful. There are a lot of frozen conflicts or disputed areas, and he mentioned South Ossetia, he mentioned Transnistria, he mentioned Abkhazia, he mentioned Crimea, and we all assumed, well, he's thinking of Sevastopol, and he mentioned Nagorno-Karabakh, and he said, you know, if Kosovo becomes independent and it's not an agreed process, this threatens to unleash problems everywhere else and in the places that he mentioned. And in the end, Russia saw that the United States, the United Kingdom, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, which were cooperating within the contact group with Russia, were going in a different direction than Moscow wanted. And so Russia withdrew from the contact group, which had functioned not only in Kosovo, but elsewhere in Yugoslavia as a body diplomatically coordinating peacekeeping and the way forward. Russia walked out, I would say at the beginning of 2007, if not earlier. Maybe it was the middle of 2007. And in February 2008, Kosovo declared independence, but not unilaterally. It was an agreed and directed process by what was left of the contact group, which was then called the Quint. Since then, there's always been a Russian presence, diplomatic presence in Kosovo, as well as a very strong Russian presence, an ever stronger Russian presence within the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Kosovo. They were there from the beginning, from 1999 onwards, but they at key points in the mission. So they had a picture, they were able to influence things. I left the mission after 14 years, 5 years ago. And since then I've been in the Czech Republic, where I've been researching the communist era secret police files, those that which were not destroyed in 1989 and have survived. And reading the files have helped me understand what was really wrong with the communist system in this country in the 1980s, why it did not function. It was a legacy, as much as anything, of the Warsaw Pact invasion, of the purges, the removal of anyone who had a mind of his own or her own throughout the system. and the fact that you had incredibly mediocre people working in and running the intelligence and counterintelligence bodies in this country. People who had no ability to put themselves in the shoes of a foreigner. They saw everything through colored glasses. A reporter who speaks many languages and comes from the United States or Britain or Germany, wherever, obviously he has to be a spy. What else could he be doing here? There was no imagination. There was no genuine ability to analyze. And if you can't analyze, if you're stuck in a naive, uneducated world of insecurity and fear, then you're doomed to constantly repeat the mistakes of the past. That's the lesson I've learned throughout my career, and it's only been confirmed in reading these files, and it was certainly confirmed at the United Nations. And one last thought. In my first year at the United Nations, I was told, read the Brahimi report. This was a report published, issued in 2000 on peacekeeping. And one of the main things, one of the main ideas of this report is that the Secretary General of the United Nations needs to be told not what he wants to hear, but what he needs to know. I interpreted that for my own purposes as every boss needs to hear what he should hear, what he or she needs to know, not what he wants to hear. I found in the UN, there was a system of sycophants who just, once I became a boss, I was the political director, people would just tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. That's not helpful. Unfortunately, in many bureaucratic systems throughout the world, people only say what they think the boss wants to hear. That's the fastest way to disaster. And we can see it visually in pictures from the third week in, second and third week in February from Moscow, where you had people sitting at one end of the table and other people at the other end of the table. And it was clear no one was able to say what they really thought. And, but that can be as true there as anywhere else. The important thing is speak up, not live in fear, and speak the truth, speak to power. Those are my messages. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Jolyon, thank you so much for such a detailed overview of the historic developments happening in Eurasia, and with an exact focus on Russia. It's truly important. And I think that one among many other brilliant points which you've mentioned is that it's true, and maybe it's the only or just one among very few consensus points which Russia and the West has nowadays, is that today's crisis and ongoing escalation lays deep in the historic entanglements happening between different countries, between West and East, and how Russia clarifies its own position, whether it's Eastern power, Western power, and somewhere in the middle. And another point which you've raised, and it's really important, is that today we really see the lack of communication between the leaders, and of course it's also a very important disadvantage of the current situation in the international order, when the leaders can't speak to each other directly, as you correctly mentioned, but just say something only to the press or in the Twitter. And of course, it doesn't help to resolve any conflicts at all. So thank you so much for your great speech. And now we, since Jolyon stopped at Europe, at the center of Europe, and today, of course, all the attention of the international analysts and journalists and ordinary people is focused exactly on this area. I would like to start and open up our discussion with this pinpoint on Eurasia, and of course it's Europe. And what's going on in Europe nowadays is not limited only to geostrategic implications. It has a lot of economic ones. And of course, the energy crisis, which has been produced because of the security situation in Europe escalating, is going to have a very huge impact on the globe in the years to come. And even today, we can see that nearly all the governments of all the countries have already published their expectations for the economic slowdown within their countries. And if we read just some newspaper headlines, they are going to go like, US gas hits a historic record, Brent oil reached its record price, UK inflation hits its high point in the recent years, and European inflation soars to the record levels, and so on and so forth. So obviously, all these pieces of news give us a very important understanding that energy crisis is going all around the globe. And the United Nations has just published its report saying that food prices have risen by 34%, and oil and crude oil and commodities prices were up by 60%, and about 25% of global population is going to suffer very serious implications of ongoing escalation. And so, since the energy is in the focus of today's news outlets and international analysts, I think that we could start with this point, and I welcome Elizaveta Makeyeva, who is going to present us the topic about relations between Russia and the European Union and the gas sector. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. 1 minute, I will turn on my presentation. So can you see me and hear well?
Yes.
Okay. So hello, dear colleagues. Good evening. And the topic of my today's presentation is relations between the Russian Federation and the European Union in the gas sector. So in recent years, negotiations between Russia and the European Union in the field of energy and above all in the gas sector have been characterized by certain difficulties. Nevertheless, cooperation continues at the level of industries and companies. It is precisely the disagreements in the gas sector that are most acute in the discussions between Russia and the European Union in the field of energy. The complication of the geopolitical situation around Ukraine, restrictions on the European Union's third energy package, and Western sanctions require not only new, more costly approaches to the development of energy within the country, but also change the priorities of Russia's international cooperation in the energy system. Due to the fact that at the present stage, the gas industry is one of the most important elements of the economy of the Russian Federation, on the reliable operation of which the further economic development of the country depends, the energy dialogue, especially with European Union countries, its difficulties and prospects are issues of extreme importance. To date, the share of gas in the fuel and energy balance of Russia is 62%, and in the European part, 86%. The energy provides about 10% of national GDP, up to 25% of revenues to the state budget of the country. And natural gas exports bring Russia about 15% of foreign exchange earnings. All these factors together emphasize the urgency and relevance of the problem. The energy policies of Russia and the European Union differ from each other, but there are areas in which their interests coincide and are very close. These areas of mutual interest include, first of all, energy trade. The share of Russian gas in in the European Union imports is about 30%, but the sale of gas on the European market provides significant revenues to the Russian budget. Secondly, the closely connected energy infrastructure of Russia and the European Union. Despite the policy of diversification of both sides, cooperation within the existing infrastructure and its development continues to bring mutual benefits. Thirdly, joint development of the innovative sector of the economy, which will ensure sustainable growth and stability for both sides. And of course, there is a modernization of Russian economy, which includes the implementation of the joint initiative Partnership for Modernization, as well as the convergence of market rules affecting gas trade between European Union and Russia. However, there are key issues of cooperation between these sites in the gas sector that just keep as key problems. The first problem is the lack of clearly defined goal, and the formulation of it is complicated by the divergence of views between Russia and the European Union on the organization of gas market. The European Union sees the future of the gas market in creating the most liberalized space between Russia and Europe. For Russia, the main goal is to maximize profits, which can be guaranteed by the control of gas pipelines built by the domestic companies and access to end consumer in the European Union. Disputes over the European Union's third energy package, which prevents the expansion of Russia's gas supplies to Europe and the construction of new gas pipelines, speak about the principled positions of each of the parties. And of course, the second issue here is insufficiency of the relevant legal framework, which really disturbs the mutual cooperation of both sides, and it has to be regulated clearly. And the last key problem here is the politicization of problems in the gas sector. Particular attention should be paid to the problem of sanctions imposed on Russia in 2014 and 2022 due to the Russian-Ukrainian crisis. These measures include many issues, and thus the crisis over Ukraine has led to a cooling of relations between Russia and European Union and the freezing of the activities of the energy dialogue, which led to the destruction of the positive potential of Russian-European cooperation. And the European Union has declared its readiness to restart energy relations with Russia after the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine and the cessation of the use of energy resources as a lever of influence. However, now the countries of the European Union are inclined to reduce imports of Russian gas and refocus on other supplies. And energy relations between Russia and European Union are one of the least developed areas which contributes to their politicization. These contradictions can currently have a serious impact on export volumes and hinder the development of closer cooperation. And to conclude my presentation, I'd like to give you some ways to resolve the contradictions, which might be effective in my opinion. So the medium-term measures, the implementation of which is expedient in the near future in order to improve Russian-European relations in gas sector, should include, first of all, the achievement of mutual understanding between Russia and European Union in the field of conflict resolution around Ukraine. Reduction of infrastructure and regulatory risks in gas relations. Thirdly, restoration of cooperation in the field of innovative use of gas and convergence of market rules and standards in order to facilitate the terms of trade in natural gas and mutual investments. Only as a result of resolving these issues, the prospects for further cooperation will become clearly. That's all that I wanted to say today. Thank you. Feel free to ask any questions.
Okay, thank you so much for nice presentation. Yes, absolutely true that, of course, today the energy escalation of the dispute, let's say it in this way, between Europe and Russia has its roots in political in political disagreements, which occupy the center of Russia-Western relations. And I think that one of the recent pieces of news concerning the issue were about the idea of the European Union to significantly decrease its dependence on Russian energy supplies. And the Euro Commission decided to come up with a plan, with a roadmap to reduce to the minimum levels its dependence on Russian commodities by 2030. And at the same time, we saw some other voices arising on the issue. We remember that India, for example, and China expressed their interest in buying and purchasing more of Russian commodities. And India actually has been doing so already by significantly increasing its imports of Russian oil at a discount price. And China has also identified its position in the way that it's looking forward to import more of Russian gas from Russian Far Eastern gas places where the gas is produced. And I think that in this particular point, the voices of other countries on the ongoing escalation are also very important. And we all remember that, for example, Brazil and some Latin American countries also said that they're not going to share the criticism of Russia. And China and India, of course, did the same way. And at the same time, there are a lot of discussions going on about the place which China is going to play in this particular crisis and in general in the world after this security situation in Europe is finally resolved. And so we'll see an absolutely new global order. And so what's China is going to be in this in this new global order. So for this reason, let's have Lyudmila Makashkina, who is going to speak about explanation of China's rise through defensive realist theory. So, Lyudmila, you're welcome.
Yes. Good evening. My name is Lyudmila. Today I would like to analyze China's rise using defensive and offensive realism theory. The rise of China in the past few decades, thanks to the rapid development, especially in the economic sector, has become one of the main subjects in the study of international relations. One of the most important questions about China's rising military and economic power is whether it seeks to overtake the USA for dominance, whether this trend will lead to future great power confrontations, or whether China prefers to maintain the status quo in international relations. First, I will briefly explain the main ideas of the theory of offensive realism. States live in an anarchic and therefore insecure world. States cannot know for sure the intentions of other states, so the only way to protect yourself is to become the strongest. Following the argument of offensive realism, a rising China will seek to supplant the US and change the international order. Considering China's impressive progress in recent years, this seems quite possible. In about 40 years, China has dramatically changed from one of the world's poorest countries, where more than 88% of its citizens live on less than $2 a day, to the world's second largest economy. The Chinese success story is largely due to the economic reforms introduced in 1978 that opened up China to foreign investors. When China overtook Japan to become the world's second largest economy in 2010, it came to be considered the second economic powerhouse after the USA. However, next slide, please. However, a closer look at China's behavior in the international arena makes it clear that the real situation is the opposite of offensive realism assumptions. First, China's statements indicate that it prefers to keep the current US-led system. This is reflected in various public statements since the end of 2003, which have emphasized that China is committed to peaceful growth. More recently, this is also reflected in the 2019 white paper titled China and the World in a New Era, which state that China is satisfied with the current international order. On the other hand, a revisionist state would express dissatisfaction with the current state of affairs in a certain way. Judging by official statements, it seems that China is constantly making efforts to present itself as a status quo state of peace. Secondly, China's actions seem to be in line with its stated preference to support the current system. One example would be China's preference for bilateral negotiations in accordance with international law to resolve disputes on land or at sea with 12 neighboring countries. Another example is its important role in ensuring world security by becoming the second largest contributor to the UN peacekeeping force. Another argument in favor of the inapplicability of the theory of offensive realism for China is the doubtfulness of the benefits from the destruction of the existing hegemon. Mearsheimer agreed that making China a hegemon is the most effective or even the only way to secure oneself, but is it really so? It is clear that as soon as China tries to suppress the United States or any other serious player in the political arena, there will be natural opposition on their part, which will only reduce China's security. The desire for hegemony is a very dangerous venture. According to defensive realist Kenneth Waltz, anarchy motivates states to seek security. As states attempt to increase its security can lead to a decrease in the security of other states due to the threat posed, known as the security dilemma. In this case, building mutual security through cooperation reduces the security dilemma. For these states, power is seen more as one of the potential useful tools for achieving security. Since the maximization of power is not the ultimate goal of states, states wish to preserve the existing balance of power in order to ensure their security. On the whole, it is true that a richer and more powerful China is gradually holding back America's boost, but this is still far from seeking regional hegemony. The modern China simply doesn't have the appropriate incentives to escalate disagreement with any great power to the point of war. China's survival is not threatened by US regional hegemony in Western countries, but aggression can certainly threaten China's core national interests, which is why China seeks to achieve more power. This will repel attacks from the US and other countries that are aggressive against China. So, conclusion, it is difficult to understand the desire for hegemony of countries, taking into consideration the irrationality of their actions and concern for survival. The United States, the only country claiming hegemony, achieves its position under condition that not applicable to China today. The only way for China to achieve hegemony is to overthrow the US, but in this case, the rise of China will not be serene, as resistance from America is inevitable. The risks involved are too great for a rational player like China to jeopardize the security of the state. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, and I think that former President Donald Trump is going to be extremely pleased that you place him on the same picture with Xi Jinping. So is it a sign that we're going to have Donald Trump back at office next elections?
I don't know, really, I just like the picture. No secret meaning in this picture.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And absolutely, yes, China, of course, is widely portrayed as an antagonist to the United States and the next hegemon who is going to occupy the global financial interests and who is going to lead the world in the decades to come. But China, of course, says that it's not the final reason of its program of bringing up all the all the best historic examples of its previous times when China was one of the greatest empires in the world. It's not the point, but still we're about to see whether it's true or not. At the same time, of course, we know that China doesn't only play large by political dimensions, but it's also one of the hugest economic powers today in the globe. And of course, the developments which are happening today, they are going to have a very significant impact not only on the global development, but of course on the development of such huge economies as China. And if we recall some of the statistics, for example, from the United Nations recent report, it said that today the world is facing so-called three-dimensional crisis. And these three dimensions are valued against 3 points. So the disruption of supplies and flow of food, energy, and money. And about 107 countries are going to have severe exposure to just one of those 3 points, and 69 countries are going to face all three disruptions. So the money, energy, and food at the same time in the years to come. And whether China is going to feel such a huge reverberations of those developments or not is also a question to be answered. But I think that one of the most important issues that China also did not expect that the United States and its Western allies would punish Russia so much in terms of economics. And of course, China can draw some lessons from the sanctions which were imposed against Russia, making it the most sanctioned country, even surpassing Iran, North Korea combined. And China thought that 2% of Russian share in global economy would guarantee that it's not going to be a target of any international sanctions, but it happened in the other way. At the same time, China becomes very active in the investment, in the global investments. And we know that its outward investments and FDI were on the rise over the recent years. So in order to bring us a larger picture of China's global investments, I would like to have Vera Chesnakova, who is going to give us the explanation of this interesting topic. So Vera, are you ready?
Yeah.
Great.
So, as Danil said, I'd like to have a talk about China's investment expansion. So, just a second. Yeah. China's struggle for world leadership and opposition to the United States are pushing China to spread its influence in different regions of the world. In this regard, China is taking a number of trade and economic steps. China is working on replacing the currency of contracts with a number of countries, from the US dollars to the yuan, investing in other countries. And usually these countries are developing. So let's have a look at 3 examples of China expansion. So the first one is China-Pakistan economic corridor. Beijing has invested $70 billion in Pakistan's economy. The purpose of this corridor is the port of Gwadar, from which further cargo will diverge to Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. For example, the project should create about 2 or 2.5 million new jobs by 2030, which in turn increase GDP growth by 3 or 3.5%. For a country bordering between a failed state and the third world, it is an impressive support. Well, a huge number of projects, large investments push one curious thought. What if cooperation between Pakistan and China leads to the fact that fragile economy of the Islamic Republic collapses and it finds itself in debt dependence on China? And of course, the highest concern comes from India, because such support for Pakistan is an unsolved territorial conflict, can change the balance of power. perhaps the most stable country on the east coast of Africa, has become a key place for investment from China. Compared to neighboring states where wars are going on, there is a hidden period of growing contradictions, Kenya has proved too advantageous. China has invested record amounts in Africa only for the period from 2014 to 2018. The figure varied at around $72 billion. For comparison, the US had this amount at around $28 billion. It is still unknown exactly how much China has invested in Kenya. The figure of $2 billion is usually mentioned. Kenya is of interest to China, first of all, as a stable island in the east of Africa, from which resources can be exported on an industrial scale. As a result, Brazil is building all the necessary facilities, from railways to energy. So at the map, you can see Kenya railways, which China had to build. And another continent of the largest investment in Latin America. For China, the market is quite new and it is located next to the United States. But here there was a country that accepted Chinese investments with open arms. That's Venezuela. I would like to say that China came to the aid of the growing economy, but Beijing has its own ambitions. Now the country in Latin America has become the point on the map where China is dumping part of its production because labor is even cheaper there. There are various Chinese companies operating in Venezuela, from the telecommunication companies, for example, ZTE, to the oil producer CITIC. But indeed, Beijing turned out to be an important partner for this country. Together with Moscow, the country avoided military intervention, unfortunately. The support of Hugo Chavez and his successor Nicolas Maduro is quite expensive. Beijing has given loans for $50 billion, but in turn, it is possible to pump oil and send it to its production facility. So why not? And as a conclusion, all three the above examples stretch across the continents, of course. And Asia could be highlighted more, but I wanted to show a broader and from a geographical point of view picture of Chinese economic expansion. And you can have a look at this infographic and maybe it will produce such a wow effect in you too. So here you can see all places where China has their expansion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. And the map was extremely nice in terms of its geographic scope, demonstrating that China is actually one of the global players who benefited most from globalization, right? And of course, the topic of globalization has been widely discussed in the previous years, especially with China's economic rise, saying that China partly or in most parts was the greatest beneficiary. And of course, it didn't want globalization to go anyway from the global agenda. But as the recent remark by Larry Fink, the BlackRock chief executive officer, BlackRock, we all know, it's one of the world's leading investment funds. He said in the interview to Nikkei Asia, Japan-based newspaper, that globalization, as we know it, has come to an end with the Ukraine crisis, as political and security concerns play a larger role in corporate decision-making. And later he adds that we've seen now that global security, national security, has become a bigger priority again than any time in the last 30 years. So now we can have a broader understanding of the era of globalization to be maybe not, of course, at its final days, but at some very important point, at the milestone in its development, and how the uncertainties in the global environment are going to shape the world economy or global politics are yet to be discovered. And as we know that in management, we also have this interesting phenomena of black swans. And for example, COVID-19 was branded as one of the black swans of the recent time. And now this year we have a lot of black swans, starting from Kazakhstan crisis, now Pakistan, Taliban in Afghanistan, and of course, Ukraine crisis. And in order to understand how the future of global marketing, management, and economic environment is going to be shaped, I would like to welcome Yulia Pavlova and Elizaveta Shevchenko, who are going to present us VUCA as a concept of strategic planning in Eurasia, since all the recent crises, unfortunately, happen just all over Eurasia. So let's have our presenters.
Yeah, so good evening, and thank you for coming to listen to us. And me and my colleague Elizaveta Shevchenko would like to present a topic, VUCA as a concept of strategic planning in Eurasia. So first, the next slide, please. Yeah. First, let's have a look at the background of this term. What is it all about? So VUCA is an acronym that was first described in 1985 by economists and university professors Warren Bennis and Bert Naynes in their book Leaders, the Strategies for Taking Charge. And also, it is worth mentioning that it was significantly shaped by the results of the Cold War. In the early 1990s, VUCA was the US Army War College's response to the collapse of the USSR. And with the demise of the so-called Eastern Bloc as the one and only enemy, the challenge was to find and implement new ways of seeing and responding under conditions of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Afterwards, it served as a great point of orientation in terms of agile and self-oriented approaches to working. And today, neither an organization's leadership nor its strategies are spared in today's VUCA world. Experiences, dogmas, and paradigms must all come under scrutiny. It is no longer a case of finding the one way or the management tool. Standards give way to individuality. And the first letter is V. V is for volatility. Volatility describes the intensity of fluctuation over time. It is easy to understand using the example of share prices, like share prices that fluctuate strongly within a short period of time show up as sharp jaggeds in the progress chart. The higher the volatility, the stronger and more jagged the swings. We live in a world that's constantly changing and becoming more and more unstable each day, where changes, big and small, are becoming more and more unpredictable. And the second letter is U. U stands for uncertainty. And in this model, uncertainty describes the unpredictability of events. The more surprises the context provides, the more uncertain it is. It's becoming more difficult to anticipate events or predict how they will unfold. Historical forecasts and past experiences are losing their relevance and are rarely applicable as a basis for predicting the shape of things to come. And it's becoming nearly impossible to plan for investments or development and growth. Then we have C, which is complexity. And complexity is influenced by the number of influencing factors and their interdependence or interaction. And the more interdependencies a system contains, the more complex it is. The term complex must be distinguished from the term complicated, even if both are often used incorrectly and equivalently. A complicated system can be simplified without destroying the internal structure of the whole system. And the last one letter is A, which is for ambiguity. And predictably, ambiguity describes the ambiguity of situation or information. Even if a lot of information is available, the evaluation of the same can still be ambiguous. And what does it mean now is like the very typical question in such situations, even when actually all facts are on the table. And communication situations often contain like a high degree of ambiguity. And to make matters worse, the people involved are often not even aware of it.
Okay, so now it's my turn. Well, we've spoken about VUCA and what does it mean, but what does it mean for your leadership and the strategy of the company? Well, you as a leader and manager are responsible for the lion's share of the decisions about the parameters that define how your organization can operate. The increase in volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity means that you and your business must seek for new orientation. It takes a fresh approach to management and leadership to guarantee positive results under changed circumstances. And the VUCA world challenges you to find your own way. You will need to understand the psychological and develop empathetic behavior. Well, in short, to be more concerned with humans and their needs. Meaning and purpose take a central role in business activities. And it's undoubtable that people determine the success of every company. This requires the right framework conditions under which each individual can and actually may contribute his or her own skills and services in the sense of agreed more like qualitative and quantitative results. The willingness to engage in genuine cooperation and take on clear responsibilities is a basic prerequisite for innovation. And this requires freedom, creativity, speed, flexibility, and a corporate culture that connects people within the organization. And this connection becomes even more significant and can be brought into the focus of leadership even more decisively. In a VUCA world, the most important thing is to anticipate the future and to strengthen cooperation in companies with modern solutions. So, well, as we spoke about VUCA, it's also vital to mention that right now, although in some companies and organizations it's widely spread, the world has changed and we have talked about it. And basically, not only the term of VUCA has been excessively used and thus lost its meaningfulness, it also has ceased to provide useful insights concerning the basic question, like how can we reasonably deal with the current circumstances? In this world and current state, VUCA does not suffice anymore to make sense of it or to figure out potential future scenarios. In other words, this is no longer a VUCA environment. It has evolved, which calls for a new terminology and a new language to explain the changed world. And actually, all the changes are can be seen in the slide. What used to be volatile has ceased to be reliable. People do not feel uncertain anymore. They're anxious. Things are not complex anymore. Instead, they obey non-linear logical systems. And what used to be ambiguous appears incomprehensible to us today. And that's actually everything that we wanted to talk about and tell you. So in case you have any questions, we'll be glad to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for a very interesting talk about this management concept. And actually, yes, I love the idea about this particular term to be applied when we want to predict what the future environment is going to be and how we can navigate our corporation, or I think even the country, in a future environment. And for this reason, I recall a very interesting book written by Yang Xuethong, who is the Dean of the Institute of International Relations in one of China's most prestigious universities, Tsinghua University. And in 2008, he was nominated as one of the 200 global most influential intellectuals by foreign policy. And 10 years ago, in 2013, he wrote a book called The Inertia of History and China and the World by 2023. And actually, he forecasted at that point how the world is going to change. And he said that China is going to become a superpower, surpassing the United States by 2023. And that more uncertainties are going to happen. For example, in East Asia, Japan will be a lesser state, while North Korea will keep up its nuclear arsenal and will ramp up the nuclear tests. In Europe, Germany will dominate the structure, the political structure. And at the same time, the European Union become more decentralized. And I think that we are moving exactly in this direction, with Europe feeling a lot of shakes after this Ukrainian crisis, and a lot of changes are going to be done to its unanimous construction. And globalization will worsen polarization all over the globe. India will lag behind China, and more crises are going to happen all around the Middle East. So if we judge that a lot of Jan Seat-Hun predictions have already realized, or they are very close to materialization, I think that more uncertainties are to come. And for this reason, we need to study another management term, which is called BANI, and the previous speakers have already touched upon this issue. And so I welcome Anna Kosarukova and Victoria Sergeeva to educate us on this interesting term.
Thank you very much. 1 second. Yeah, we're ready to start. Good evening, everyone. I hope that you can hear and see me well, and my presentation, our presentation too. So our topic today is BANI as a management model and critical philosophy of the new world. And the outline of our presentation will cover VUCA and BANI. What is it about, its similarities and differences? Then BANI, what's new about it? We'll discuss also how to cope with the BANI world and how it affects business in general. And also we'll talk about advice and some predictions, I think, in the BANI world. So first of all, here on the slide, you can see the quote, and I think it perfectly describes how much the world has changed and how it's accelerating over the years. And it says that, as just one example, it took radio nearly 40 years to reach an audience of 50 million people. Television took 13 years to reach the same number, but the internet indeed just 4 years. Our world is increasingly ephemeral and fast-moving. So let's move on to the comparative analysis of VUCA and BANI. As our colleagues Julia and Lisa have already mentioned, that VUCA is about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So what about BANI? It paints a clear picture of how the world looks nowadays, and it makes each aspect more tangible. What used to be volatile has ceased to be reliable. People do not feel uncertain anymore. They're more anxious, and things are not complex anymore. Instead, they obey like non-linear logical systems. And also what used to be ambiguous appears incomprehensive to us nowadays. And what does BANI stand for? B is for brittle. It means that you cannot rely on something brittle. It may break down, and despite looking reliable or flexible, even unbreakable. It may even be up to a breaking point that cannot be predetermined. In a BANI world, a brittle system may work well on the surface while being on the verge of breaking down for good. A system turning brittle often is the result of maximizing profits, and that applies to basically any area of life. So as an example, for example, monocultural farming, effectively draining the soil plus making it more vulnerable. One minor error may cause only this crops harvest fail. And another example is the resource curse, when large regions focus on their natural resources exclusively and just before technological progress supersedes them entirely. So, and history really offers numerous examples of both patterns, and you can find just a critical point of failure in any system. A here in this acronym stands for anxious. Against this backdrop, the obvious consequence is that the next letter in BANI should stand for anxious. And if someone is anxious, he or she feels helpless and unable to make decisions, any available option may potentially turn out terribly wrong. In an anxious world, people usually watch to the next disaster to happen, tend to become passive to avoid wrong decisions, feel desperate about missed opportunities. Also, they might face the terrible gut feeling of depending on someone who may very well make decisions with negative consequences for them. Non-linear here, it's the next letter, N, and as a cause of consequence no longer are accessible in advance. The basic logic of what we know as a linear cause-effect chain has become non-linear today. They do not quite fit together. For example, small decisions have disproportionate impact that can turn out beneficial as well as devastating. Changes lead to consequences which, with huge delays, or only later become tangible. A lot will not necessarily help a lot, and the great effort may just fizzle out. I here is for incomprehensible. Such nonlinear results of any given cause, event, or decision often seem to lack any kind of logic or purpose. They're incomprehensible. We cannot grasp the cause because it may have been long gone or it may appear too appalling. So BANI, what's new? This is a framework to make sense of the chaotic world. At first glance, the observation may shed a devastating light on the formerly VUCA world. One could regard BANI as a rather dystopian, even apocalyptic point of view. Working in this field of future scenarios always carries the risk of end of the world images, while the average citizen may have those too. We have statistics and numbers such as suicide rates, studies on alcoholism, and other surveys indicating that the BANI world confounds people all over the world on all levels. This may result in solid despair and a general tendency to succumb to pessimism. Being more accurate and concise than VUCA, the BANI acronym offers a productive framework to make sense of the world anew, to better grasp the links between causes and effects, to find a stable structure to determine what is going on in the world. And the BANI framework here is an underrated gate to the future. Obviously, these are reactions rather than solutions to any problem, but this indicates that the problem can be solved at any point, despite the anxiety we feel so deeply. Clearly, we have left the VUCA world and entered a new BANI world level or phase it can be called differently. And with BANI now we have a new language at our disposal to describe the grasp what is going on, and it provides us with a basis to build on and to develop new approaches with. This is a chance to size and let us explore the options we have. Now I pass the floor to my colleague Anna, and she will continue. Thank you.
Yeah, hello guys. So today, how can the business cope with the BANI world? This is quite difficult, but still some specialists, they have ideas. And the first idea is to train employees in soft skills, because in the context of agility, a great way to adapt to growth is by just strengthening your teams, seeking a culture of collaboration, adapting well-distributed structures, and investing in training are tools that can help make the organization more resilient. Implementing a collaboration culture can also increase the communication and transparency between individuals, teams, departments, and branches. Dealing with anxiety requires more company empathy, and training employees in soft skills, which will become increasingly essential in times to come, can also really help. In a non-linear world, rigid plans tend to be a burden on business. Companies that do not innovate and rely on proven methods of doing things often find themselves behind the competition and can't adapt quickly enough to changes in their environment. That is why they need to try to monitor and create the innovations for all the processes, for all the technologies they use, and in social relationship, as well as the innovations in their processes of business. And of course, it's essential to use the technologies like artificial intelligence, big data, and data science to develop these innovations and improve these processes. So the next slide, please. So one of the best models to deal with the BANI world is the grounded thinking model. For some companies, this model is one of the most productive answers to the societal and economic questions of BANI world, and it was invented as a business model of the future. So it is guided by the complexity of the world, and thanks to the feedback loops and large context, it helps to the development of business models and ongoing processes. So how does it work? I can see on the slide that not most of the worlds are really seen very well, but this model serves to develop fundamental, profound, and effective decisions in social system, and the grounded solutions of complex problems that are based on the elimination from the inside and the outside. So this system takes into account the external problems and internal problems, and also the world itself. So they can predict most of the processes, so they can count all the details and take into consideration most of the details. So in order to generate the solutions with maximum effect, they use the moves, which we can see on the first step. Then the conceptual terms, it is codes, where with code category, and denser code cultures or boundaries of the related codes, we can see the categories. And with a high degree of abstractions which are developed, the leverage of the most effective core category results from the density and saturation of the media and context space. So all these steps are connected with dealing with big data and helps companies to solve the problems more effectively and just faster. So as the human resource specialist, we decided to focus more on the employees and human resources, because we all know that the BANI world provokes the project delays, the market drops, and as we can see now that most of the companies are just leaving the country market, we decided to look deeper into the human problem. So this is the employee burnout. And in BANI world, employee burnout rate now is on rise. So more than 52% of all workers are now feeling burnout, and up to 9% it has raised from the pre-COVID survey. So during these 2 years, while working online, while working distantly, we can see the rise of the burnout rate. So what the company can do first of all, we have looked through the J-Maker-SIO formula to try to deal with this world, with this BANI problems. So brittleness can be overcome by developing the resilience and capacity in the employees. The anxiety really asks for empathy and mindfulness, which can company give to their people. Non-linearity calls for the context and adaptability from the employees and from the company, and impossibility demands the transparency and institution, which can also be organized by the company. So what company can do? I'll try to be more precise and shorter because I think for a lack of time. So company can ensure and maintain the context focus on burnout. They can check the employees. They can have the psychological help, some chats and opportunities for them to declare their burnout, to prevent it in the first steps, not like when the employee just is about to leave the company. Also, company can introduce psychological services that enable employees to explore their destructive beliefs, so they can work with it. So as they feel a bit depressed, sad, or something, they can go to this psychological service and have the support and have the help. And also the companies can shape the environment where employees can relax, concentrate, and stimulate their mental activity, because these can really help people to be more creative, to be more adaptive and resilient to all the problems, so they can try to prevent the problems before they occur. And all these three steps as a company can cause the company a lot of expenses. But this burnout epidemic is a really big problem for the company. And according to the WHO report, every dollar invested in the well-being of the company employee results in $4 of their increased productivity. So if they try to prevent it, they can get even more money and more profit from the employees who are supported, who are taken care of, and who are understood. So the next slide, please. It's just our final line. So what should we focus on in this BANI world? These are some futurists' advice. So we should try to take part in our lifelong educations, develop our skills constantly, to adapt to the changes and to take them constantly and understand what's going on. Also, we should concentrate on ourselves, so could take some psychological health, some self-acceptance, work with this, for example, go to the specialist. And also we should develop our critical thinking and the ability to prioritize, to choose the best ways to do the best ideas for our job and the best opportunities in our life, not to get overwhelmed, and live a happy life in this BANI world. So probably that is all we wanted to say. We're ready to answer your questions, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much. And I hope that Russian corporations and multinational organizations, of course, will use both VUCA and BANI concepts in order to drive us out of today's economic crisis, which is going to loom large over the economy in the years to come. Okay, today we've spoken a lot about Asia and China being in the driving seat of the today's changes in the global environment, and kind of the most important rising power in the non-Eurocentric world. But of course, it's not only limited to Asia. We also have another part of the world, Latin America. And we know that Russia has been recently expanding its ties with Latin American states. And we all remember that Moscow has outreached to Brazil and Argentina and Nicaragua and Cuba and many other states in the region in order to offset the negative implications of the Western sanctions. And we also can recall that around the time when the operation was launched, two presidents of Latin American states, so from Argentina and Brazil, visited Moscow physically. And so it also gives us a hint of the new trends in today's non-Eurocentric environment. So I would like to welcome Yuri Kranievsky to talk about the political regional organizations of Latin America and how it's going to impact the future of global order.
Thank you very much. So my name is Yuri Kranievsky, and the topic I'm going to speak about is geopolitical regional organizations of Latin America. And in my thesis, I really want to speak with you about Latin American integration system and the most interesting and the most powerful political organizations of Latin America. And before going deeply into this thesis, I firstly want to speak about background of the situation, and I want to start firstly with the term Latin America, because there are three possible solutions how we can call Latin America, and the most popular in Russia is a region which is on the south from United States. So there are all countries which are on the south from United States, but truly to say, it's more likely to say that Latin America is first of all countries which were part of different European countries and has Latin languages. So Spanish, Portugal, and French languages. So that is why countries that were colonies of United Kingdom and Netherlands are truly not a part of Latin America, but nevertheless, it's common to call them Latin America too. So let's begin. And the first date we should mention in the integration system is 1808, when Simon Bolivar started a series of Spanish-American wars of independence. And after that, a majority of countries in modern Latin America became independent states. So after that, in 1826 year, Simon Bolivar tried to run a Congress of Panama, when independent countries of America tried to create an organization to bring together a policy towards Spain. But unfortunately, this Congress was unsuccessful because many of countries didn't visit it. Nevertheless, 63 years after that, there was created the first Pan-American Conference, and next year, a Pan-American Conference created its own institution, which was called the Pan-American Union, which was transformed finally in 1948 year into the famous nowadays Organization of American States. So it's a local form of United Nations. And after that, many countries understood that the United States of America really tried to increase their influence in that region, on their words, to fight against communism. So as a reaction to that process, some American countries tried to create their own institutes and organizations. So that's why in 1960 year, the Latin American Free Trade Association was created. And after that, it was transformed into Latin American Integration Association. And finally, in 1986, Rio Group, as a pact of friendship and help, was created. And now I'm going to speak about main organizations for Latin America, because there are no all international organizations for Latin America, because there are a lot of them. I want just speak about most interesting. And the first group I really want to show you is the continental organizations or Pan-American organizations. So there are 4 of them. The first one is very important. It's the Organization of American States, and there are 35 countries on the paper, but in real there are only 33 because Cuba was stopped in that organization after Cuban Revolution. but in 2009 year, it was offered to restore their status, but Cuba declined. And also nowadays, Venezuela has a very specific status because Organization of American States don't recognize Nicolas Maduro as the president of Venezuela. So that is why the representative of Venezuela in that organization is a representative of Juan Guaido. So the main purpose of that organization is to promote solidarity and democracy in that region, and as a tool of that organization to promote these ideas is different resolutions on main political events in some countries. As a result, in that year, Nicaragua declared that they want to leave that organization because of the interference in their internal affairs. So they will leave the organization in the next year. And as a result, there were created a community of Latin American and Caribbean states. In Spain, it's CELAC. So the main idea of that organization is very similar to OAS, but without United States and Canada. So it's solely the Latin American organization. And the idea was quite good, but unfortunately, after coming to power of new president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, Brazil left that organization, but maybe they will rejoin in future. So the main idea of these two organizations is to be a form of United Nations to solve different conflicts and to react on different political solutions. Also, there are two integrational organizations. So it's Latin American Economic System and Latin American Integration Association. Their idea to promote different integrational processes in that region and to increase the value of different ties between these countries. Both these organizations were basis for many other international organizations in that region. So let's go next. And the second group is called sub-regional organizations because they are really specialized in very specific groups. So the first organization is Association of Caribbean States. It's specifically political organization, which should also react on different political events and to increase the quality of integration in that region. And the second one is very important organization. It is called Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. And that organization is very important just because it's not solely political and economical union, but also the one organization which has their own currency. It's very rare event for our world. The next organizations are Caribbean Community and Central American Integration System, and both of these organizations promote different projects for members of that states. First of all, they promote common markets. They really want to create their own custom unions, and also there was a project of Central Bank of Central America and the Parliament of Central America. They do not have a real power, but they are very important as an event in that region and quality of the integration system of that country. So the next two very important are Andean Community and Pacific Alliance. They are also important because it's very interesting that those two regions really want to integrate in different directions, and Andean Community is more effective in that way because they created not solely a free trade zone, but also they want to create a custom bloc too. And we may speak about the most important and the most successful organization in all Latin America. It is called Mercosur, or in English, Southern Common Market. There are only 4 countries, but as you can see, there are also 7 additional associated countries, because they are members of Andean Community, because they really want to join Mercosur. There was a project of creating one system, which was called UNASUR, or Central American Integration System. It was created in 2008 as a form of local European Union as an end. analogical system. But unfortunately, there were a lot of troubles, and in 2018 year, some countries left that organization, and now there are 4 of them. And finally, I may speak about 2 very important ideological organizations, because despite the fact that some governments are really prefer to change sometimes, so there were left parties, after that there were right parties, and etc. So there were 2 attempts to create a really ideological organization. So the first one was ALBA, or Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, and we can call it as a form of local SEV, because left-wing parties tried to create an alliance of left-wing countries. Fortunately or unfortunately, it wasn't successful, and nowadays there are only 10 countries which really want to use resources of Venezuela. But nevertheless, it's a very interesting experience, which didn't realize fully their potential. And on the other hand, there was a right-wing version of ALBA, which is called ProSur. It was created just 3 years ago as a version of UNASUR, but with right-wing specific. Fortunately or unfortunately, it is not successful too, because there is no institutes or etc. It's just a forum, and it's just formally an organization, but in fact it is not. And in last year, after elections in Chile, Chile left ProSur, and maybe in that year some countries will leave that organization too. So I'm going to speak about conclusion, why I decided to speak about all these organizations and all that facts. Over the past 60 years, Latin American integration has developed very much. And nowadays, I suppose many Latin American countries really want to create their own pole of power in that region and to become really independent. They don't try to challenge with the United States, but they really want to create their own sub-region with their own economic system and political system. So that is why we really should estimate them as new allies, friends, and trade partners. China has already used the channel to increase their influence in that region, and on the map which I created, you can see the countries where China, which is red, leads in. On the left, you can see important countries, and on the right, you can see export from these countries. Of that, terms were taken 2 years ago, because I have no statistics from last year. So you can see that China is has very big influence in that region, and unfortunately, Russia doesn't have it. Russia has but about 2% of total import and export in that region, and I suppose it's a very bad situation, and we really need to get involved in that process before it's too late. I suppose that's all what I wanted to say. I'm ready to answer your question.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we obviously could see that Latin America has its own very vibrant and active political integration process. And of course, it adds to the argument which is highlighted in the name of our panel discussion, that the world becomes less Eurocentric. And of course, it's not only about Europe, and there are more parts in which we could see many vibrant processes going on. So, dear colleagues, before we finish up, I would like to have 10 minutes more of the questions and answers. And I would like to ask Jolyon whether he wants to add something to the discussion, or we could take 2 or 3 questions from the audience for you, and just to have some extra knowledge from your extensive experience. Jolyon, what do you think?
One sec. There. Sorry about that. Yeah, fine. I can ask questions. I'm more than happy also to answer questions. I would preface all that by saying that I was impressed with the presentations. I learned something from each one. I was extremely impressed by the level of English and professionality of the presentations. Hats off. I mean, I have a good ear for languages, and there were much of the time I couldn't tell where anyone was from. There was, you know, a distinctly Russian or foreign accent wasn't even heard. I mean, this is, for me, unusual, but I mean, that's also a part of globalization, not only in Russia, but everywhere else. The more we speak each other's languages, the closer, or the lack of national distinctions. Okay, as far as what I might ask,
Jolyon, sorry to interrupt you. Just one quick question. I
Yes.
see that we have one more participant.
That's what I thought.
Yes, just joining in.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
So,
let's do
and
that, and then
yeah,
we'll have the discussion.
and then you will comment on that as well. So yes, and since we've stopped at the idea of Europe and of Eurocentrism becoming less the hot issue of our today's environment. So yeah, let's add Tatiana Sidorkina to our discussion. She is going to speak about asymmetric interdependence.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so sorry for being late because I had an exam and it has just finished. So I would like to talk about the features of economic cooperation between European Union and Russia during the 1992 and 219. I've chosen this period of time because we know that the first date is the creation of European Union, and the last date is just the date before the COVID, which set it up the most economic growth in developing countries. So I would like to be short, and I'll go to present the relation formation and also the growth in mutual cooperation, also their inter-crisis period and the decline of cooperation due to the sanctions and the conclusions. So firstly, I have to say that some main European countries had established relationships with the USSR, and as the Russian Federation declared itself as a legal successor for the former USSR, of course, it took some obligations on itself. So actually, it took the obligations by the agreement of the partnership between USSR and the European communities. But after this, during the European Union formation, some leaders began the discussion about the establishment of the relations between Russian Federation and European Union, and it had found their ideas in the agreement, partnership and cooperation agreement between Russian Federation and European Union, which have been signed in 1994 and ratified a little bit late in 1997. So they concluded the key issues like the movements of goods, services, individuals, and capitals. So I have to point out that these key issues are also signed in the European Union contract. European Union contract during their Maastricht agreement. So it represents the values of such movements on the European Union territory. So here you can see the figures that represents the importance of the European Union trade for Russia, and you can see that these figures are stable, but they are affected by the economic downturn during 1994 and 1998, both in export and in import. But we can point out some main product groups that are significant for their trade exchange. And we can point out that during their structure of exports of the Russian Federation, we can point out that industrial goods have increased, but the fuel have decreased during the 90s, and the minerals also have increased. And during and talking about the structure of imports of Russian Federation from European Union, we can point out that some figures as industrial goods and that chemical products and food products have increased. And I would like to draw your attention to the such features as chemical products and industrial goods, because since this period of time, they have been increasing during the whole period. So after this, it has been the period of mutual cooperation growth, and it had some legal basis. So in 1999, both Russian Federation and European Union established their strategies how to cooperate between each other, where they have provided nations with their key values, and they had an idea of building a common European economic space. So this space had to have 4 common spaces in creation, and economic had to be one of the biggest issue there. But I have to say that it hadn't been created because of their political situation. But it had some roadmaps that had been taken for their creating a sustainable economic growth of the economies through the effective mutual trade. And as you can see on the chart, really the mutual trade have been growing till 2008, and in 2008 it has a slight decline because of their world economic crisis. So during this period of time, the economic cooperation has been growing, but it has been growing also by a certain kind of products. And it also, if you're talking about Russian imports, it has been growing in pharmaceutical industry, it has been growing in vehicles and machinery. And if we are talking about the European Union imports, it had been growing also in minerals, in some fuels, and in petroleum. And here on their slide, you can see the chart where you can see that the consumption of natural gas and the trade of natural gas have been a little bit stable, but the consumption, the trade of crude oil have been increased twice, and the trade of solid fuels have increased in 5 times. So yeah, and here you can see that that for European Union, the trade of Russian crude oil and the trade of Russian natural gas has been significant because it took the biggest part in its trade profile by crude oil and by liquefied natural gas. And also for Russia, some European Union countries has been the key countries for their supply. We can point out that the Netherlands took the first place, Italy is the second, and Germany the third. And also there has been a bigger share of Poland and also Lithuania. So after, I would like to point out some inter-crisis period features. I would just to give you an information that after 2009, after the world economic crisis, the economy tried to keep on the track. And in 2012, it pointed the amount that have been before 2008. And the structure of the imported and export just hasn't had a stronger change. So, but after 2014, it has been it was political crisis, and the trade profile has decreased and the trade volume also decreased. So, but what after? So we can see the here just during the inter-crisis period also the trade of European Union with the European Union was the significant part of Russian trade profile. So here you can see that 46% of all the trade were trade of fuels with the European Union. And talking about the trade of non-fuels, European Union also pointed out like 30% in Russian trade profile. And here you can see that the most common features were also chemicals, metals, and wood. So after the inter-crisis period, there has been a cooperation decline because of the sanctions and counter-sanctions, and we can point out that some European scientists have been estimated this impact of sanctions at 130 million euros annually. And you can see that the trade balance of the European Union with the Russian Federation during this period of time are the same as the Russian crude oil export during the same this period of time. So we can see the similarity in these pie charts, in these graphs. And also I would like to point out that even during this this period, the Russia had an impact on their European market of crude oil, because firstly, in the previous period, it had gained like a monopoly position there. You can see it on their on the chart that represents their index of monopolization of the markets. And so to conclude, I would like to point out some figures. Firstly, we can say that political and economical crisis strongly affect the exchange of goods between countries, but the political crisis affect hardly. So the growth of turnover is associated both of the increase in the production of trade over and the increase in prices for goods. And also we can point out an asymmetric structure of the commodity exchange, because Russia supplies energy resources and imports high-tech goods like vehicles, transport, pharmaceuticals, and electric goods. And also for Russia, European Union is the key partner that had been also on the first and on the second place, changing with the US. And for European Union, Russia is the fourth trading partner by volume, but one of the key strategic partners, because it gives the most part of energy for European Union. And the main countries that we can point out in this trade are Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and France, and they are they rest still nowadays. So I would like to finish my report, and thank you for hearing me.
Okay, thank you very much. And yes, it's true that, of course, the asymmetric structure of Russia-European relations also has its own influence at even today's crisis, because we see a very huge rift going on within the European Union when some countries want to sanction Russia more, while, for example, Germany, which is highly dependent on Russian supplies, opposes this idea. And so we'll see whether this asymmetric structure will change following the ideas of European Union to decrease its dependency on Russian oil and gas in the years to come. It's going to be interesting topic to look over. So, and now before we finish, let's have about 10-15 minutes of questions. I think that it would be fair for Jolyon to ask 2 questions to the audience, and they will take 2 questions from the audience to Jolyon, but please keep it very short and very precise. So Jolyon, could you start?
Okay, well, I found the last, let me just close the door because the dog is barking.
Yeah, for sure.
1 second.
So dear colleagues, so those who want to ask Jolyon questions, please write it to the chat for me, so as I can understand that those of you who want to ask those questions.
Yeah. First of all, let me get my notes straight. There we go. Oh, sorry. Bear with me. I've got to open the door. I'm sorry.
Danil, I'm sorry, while he's away, may I thank you all?
Thank
the
you.
Moderator, the
thank
presenters, just to thank you. Very insightful and thoughtful presentations. Thank you for your moderation, because it was really great. Your comments were so substantial. And well, I would like to thank organizers who let us happen this. Thank you.
Absolutely true. Yeah. So Jolyon, you're welcome back.
So I'd like to ask Tatiana, because it's the topic that she presented, or that you presented, was extremely appropriate for the current situation, except the data to a great extent is 15 years old or 8 years old. And presumably there's more data available, more recent data available. Where do you see Russia's trade with Europe, with the developing world heading under present circumstances?
So nowadays, our leaders considered the point of view that they have to pay more attention for the developing world, and particularly for Asian markets, and they tried to transfer their pipelines to these spheres. But of course, we know that we have a huge interdependence between Europe and Russia, and Europe nowadays can't cope without our energy supplies, so without our crude oil and without our liquefied natural gas. So of course we can understand that the cooperation in this sphere will still remain the same, like it had been during and after the crisis of 2014. But for the future development, we can say that we would like to pay, Russia would like to pay more attention for the developing Asian markets.
And do you think, what's the likelihood of succeeding in developing Asian markets under present circumstances? I mean, are the prospects good, or is this a blind alley in your view?
I think it's good, because we know that there is a huge demand of the crude oil from the Chinese side, so they also need it. But I'm pretty sure that our government will try to find also other markets for the supplying. So I think it would be some Asian countries that don't have a lot of crude oil or natural gas, or the sources to exploit it.
Right. Okay, thank you. Now, on VUCA and VUCA and BANI. So Yulia, Elizaveta, Anna, and Victoria. Here, I've got another question, but I've got to find the right screen. How do you see your personal strategies as managers or IR specialists in the post-globalization world under present circumstances? Where is this going to head for you?
I think I may answer. So my future role as a manager, well, basically right now I'm working as a project manager nowadays, and not in Russia. Yeah. So I think that everything is possible, although current circumstances are quite controversial, and they obviously bring us a lot of changes into our everyday lives and also some barriers. But I suppose that right now it's our kind of mission to find the ways how to approach them and how to deal with them, so that we can efficiently communicate and cooperate further.
Well put.
Colleagues, and we also have...
It's very difficult to, obviously, under present circumstances, for anyone to foresee developments and how they're going to impact trade, management, etc. But yeah, you seem to...
Yes, colleagues, and just to combine both questions, we also have one question about BANI from Irina. So Irina, could you ask it, please, personally? I don't think that we have a connection. Could we activate the mic for Irina, please?
I will.
Yeah, here we go, yeah.
So this question is equal on BANI and problem on VUCA as well, but BANI is a newer concept. As this section is mainly on international relations and changes on the globe, do you have any assumptions about how BANI reality is distributed all over the world? What countries are mostly within the BANI, VUCA doctrine, and what have migrated to BANI? Is it clear, or I shall specify? What countries are still within the VUCA doctrine and which have migrated, not necessarily to say why, because answer is, to BANI?
Well, maybe it's not that easy to answer now, especially in this situation, because it seems like the whole world now is in BANI, because we do not know what's going to happen tomorrow and what each country can react on the situation. For example, tomorrow, as we can see now, because of the sanctions, because of the ruining their relationship and the communication between countries. But I would say that the most developed countries like the United States, the UK, most of the countries of Europe are in the BANI world, and some countries of the African part of the globe and maybe some countries of the Southern America can stay in VUCA for the moment, but we cannot really estimate it properly because no analysis has been conducted during these years, I suppose, for that estimation of the country position, because BANI has only entered our world in 2021. That is why it's just developing.
Okay, I think that we've got it, but I think that maybe the European Union could be described as an entity which switched to BANI, because Europe nowadays is under huge pressure, facing a lot of crises, because some countries, for example, China, face just energy crisis, and Russia face political and economic crisis, but not energy one, obviously. And Europe faces all the crises at the same time. So it's energy, finance, it's political, and so on and so forth. So could we say that maybe Europe could be described in this particular moment as the entity facing or migrating to BANI? And maybe Jolyon, as a person who is on the ground, could comment on that as well.
Because he's in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. So, Clicks, first, let's start with you. Do you agree with the European Union? And then we'll go to Jolyon.
Probably yes, but we cannot say that it's the only part of the world which
exactly
in BANI. Yeah.
But still, they can utilize, I think, this concept in order to benefit from it. So, Jolyon, do you agree that maybe the European Union is facing all of those crises could win from applying BANI concept or not?
I'll be absolutely honest with you. I would have to have the BANI chart in front of me and go item by item, and I don't. But if one of you tells me once again what BANI stands for, I can do it. So B is for.
It's brittle, yeah.
And maybe we have a slide about this. Maybe we
yeah, if you show me the slide, then.
Yeah, one moment, please. I will turn the presentation on again. Here it is.
There we go. Brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. Well, look, Europe is not a monolith, as we all know. 27 members of the European Union, and brittle, well, I can think of one or two. Anxious, I can think of more. Nonlinear, there I'm not so sure. We'd have to go country by country. Incomprehensible, there's a question of from whose perspective. If we're talking about their relationship to Russia under present circumstances, I think we understand almost all of them. And the ones who are not towing the line, I think we understand what they're up to very well, under the rubric of all politics is local. It's not about Russia, it's about what's happening in a concrete country. But what the crisis or the current situation, or however we call it, is showing is an extraordinary level of unity within the European Union member states. Yes, Germany is dragging its heels, not because it's so much Germany as because it has a new government with a number, with some political and emotional baggage and some indecisiveness. And in that sense, they're more VUCA than BANI, the Germans, at the moment.
Yeah.
But that's the current government, rather, you know, and it doesn't apply to the previous German government, but the current German government still is trying to understand the ground that it's standing on. It may also help explain the timing of this crisis and why it was decided to start to undertake the so-called special operation now, rather than 6 months ago or 6 months from now. But in the end, Germany will be on board. It's simply, the bigger the country, the more difficult it is to find a common line politically, domestically. I mean, that applies to the United States as well. Historically, I mean, if we look at US engagement in Europe in the First World War, it took until 1917 before the US entered the conflict. In the Second World War, it wasn't until the Japanese attacked the Americans at Pearl Harbor and the next day Hitler declared war on America that the Americans engaged directly. And as one of my professors, international relations professors, said back in 1974 or so to my class, and he was an immigrant from Czechoslovakia. The Americans saved Europe twice. What makes the Europeans so sure that the Americans will do it a third time? The Europeans are understanding finally the need to focus, and that divisiveness is the worst thing they can do under present circumstances, and to help because they're helping themselves and not only Ukraine under present circumstances. So It may be incomprehensible to some people in some places, but I think that there's been unusually little ambiguity for most of these countries, and brittle doesn't quite describe it. It doesn't really describe things either. Anxiousness, yes, because when there's a war in Europe, there is uncertainty about how far things can and will go. Non-linearity, that depends on developments. So far, to be brutally honest, the developments since the 24th of February have not been surprising, given the forces on the ground and what the stated and unstated intentions were. And I think I made that clear with my historic parallels. If one understood what happened in '68, then given the numbers this time round, the outcome was fairly inevitable. If people can't be bothered to study modern history, then they're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Okay, so we've violated all the time limits, but I just think it's
only the time limits.
Yeah, that's the testimony to the fruitfulness and productiveness of our today's discussion. So I thank you all for your brilliant contribution to our discussion of the non-Eurocentric world and a new global environment. And I especially thank Jolyon, my co-host, for making this discussion even more vibrant and interesting for all of us to listen.
And thank you, Danil, for a superb job of moderating.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. So I hope we'll see each other again at some point in the future. Have a nice evening, and it was a great pleasure.
We do hope to. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
All the best. Good luck to you all.